Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be going over how to read CSVs, specifically in F# Interactive. Now, most of the code that we go over this will work in F# in general, but there's a few quirks to Interactive, and that's why we're focusing on it today. Okay, so the way that we're going to go over this is first start off with some requirements so that we can make sure that you're set up for success. Then we're going to go over reading CSVs into memory to actually have access to it in your code. And then finally, we're going to go over how to actually iterate over those CSVs because you probably actually want to do something with that data. So let's start off with requirements. So in order to actually go through this tutorial, what you're going to need is first off the .NET SDK, so you can actually run .NET and therefore F#. And then because this one's specifically for interactive, you're going to need the .NET Interactive setup or run it via notebooks. So if you just Google this stuff, it should come up pretty easy to install yourself. If you need some help, I do have links to the official documentation for how to do this in this blog post linked at the bottom, which I'll also have in the description for you. So assuming that you already have these things installed and are ready to go, let's go forward into how to actually read CSVs. Now, I wanted to first just tell you about the folder structure I'm using so that you can kind of understand why the paths in my code look the way that they do. So pretty simple. Basically, first, just got this root folder, and inside it, we just have this notebook, this IPYNB, which is just a read CSV example, which we'll be going through the code of. And then the only other thing to call out is we have this resources folder next to us, which is where the CSV exists that we'll be reading. So hopefully with that context, this makes a little bit more sense, and let's dive into the code. Okay, so here's a screenshot of my code for actually reading CSVs with F# Interactive. The first thing to call out, and I think this is the big gotcha and the big difference between using F# Interactive versus real F#, is this /r syntax right here. And this /r really only exists in interactive, and what it's saying is basically I have a reference that I need you to go out and install. And the reason we do this is because there's no like fsproj, like a normal full-blown F# project is, so it has no way to know what it needs to install. And this is how we tell it that it needs to install something. So basically what it's saying is, hey, I have a reference, you need to use NuGet, and you need to get this f#.data package. If you didn't do this, this f#.data would still exist, but there's actually a lot of packages that use f#.data as their namespace, and so CSV file and all the CSV parser utilities that we want to use wouldn't exist. So that's why we got to do this. You'll see it when you run your interactive that it's actually going and fetching this and installing it into your workspace. But that's what this does, and this is super important. If you don't do this, it's probably not going to work. Okay, so that's the interactive part. That's a little bit special. From there, everything's pretty straightforward. So, we're actually opening f#.data that's now enriched with this NuGet package that we actually need with the CSV parser in it. And then we're opening system because we'll need this for actual directory pathing and stuff. And then the real meat of this is to use the CSV file type that we've got here and just call load on it. And what it does is we're just going to pass it a directory that paths to our CSV. And it's going to try and load that. Now, there's a lot of flags that you can pass in to load here, like separators and stuff if you want to load it in different ways. But you can look at the full API docs for that. In our case, this is simple CSV, so this is all we have to do. So hopefully that works for you. I would definitely recommend, if you're following along in your own code, to just double check and make sure this is actually working for you, that you've got the paths right and everything like that. Because if this doesn't work, nothing else I show you is going to work either. So go ahead and do that, and we can go over into actually iterating over our CSV data because we probably actually wanted to do something with that data we loaded. So I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what's actually in that CSV file I have. Basically, there's just a letter column and a number column, and it's just ABC123. So this is basically, the simplest CSV I could think of, and so that's why we are using it. Other thing to note is that when I exported this, it is just using the normal default comma separators, but if yours doesn't, that's a good reason to use like the separator flag in the load function. Okay, so the most common thing you're going to want to do is just iterate over rows. And so CSV gives us this nice rows property, which basically just gives us a sequence of all of the rows. So here we can just pass csv.rows to sequence.length, and it'll just tell us, the count in that sequence, which we know is 3 because we just saw what was in it before. Now, you probably want to figure out how to actually access the individual column data. And so basically what I'm doing here is I'm just iterating over each of the rows with sequence.map, and then I'm passing in that row here, and I'm just printing out what is actually in this. And so basically what we have is this CSV row type, and on CSV row type there's this columns property, and you can see that we actually have the data ABC123 here. And so probably if you're trying to access this, you're going to use this columns in some sort of paradigm like this. Now I'm showing you a lot of code. The full source code is again available down here in my blog post. So if you just want to copy and paste it and run it into your own notebook, you can do that there. Now, aside from iterating over rows, headers is probably the next most common thing that you want to do. And we can see that when we look at what headers actually is in this property on our CSV, it's actually going to be an option of string array. And if we look at the value of that, because it actually exists, there's a letter column and number column, which were our headers from before. Now, not all CSVs have this, and this is a flag that you can pass into the load function. So when you're accessing this CSV.headers, the type system shows you that it might not exist, and that's why it's an option. So you're probably going to want to access it with some sort of match like this, where you say, some, if it exists, go, do whatever you want. Here, we're just iterating over the headers and printing them out so you can kind of see. But, there might be a case where it's none, so you'll probably have to do a match like this. So that should be an overview to get you started, reading and iterating over any data that you have in a CSV. Obviously, there's a lot more that you can do in this. So here's the official docs for those. One, F# interactive, if you wanted to learn more about that, #rcall I talked about earlier. And two, the official API docs for CSV parser, which is built into F#.data. Here's the links here, and if you don't want to type those out, I again have them referenced from my blog post, which will be linked in the description. Finally, if you are ready to move beyond F# interactive, beyond notebooks, here's my guide to quickly getting set up with F# projects via the .NET CLI. Should get you started, and you can use most of the code that we used here to read CSVs in it. And that's it. Let me know if you have any questions about F#, reading CSVs, anything like that, and I'll try to answer them. And here's where you can find me to send me those messages, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. So I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.